Welcome back, Guanxi University East Asia and International Management class. We've already reviewed, topic 1 was management theories. Obviously we talked about overall motivational management theories like Maslow, Herzberg, McGregor, equity theory, all of those theories were in here. Then we also got into the idea of the open model theories of comparative management. The next main topic we talked about was overall East-West and the differences, and we talked about cultural differences, or here cultural dimensions. Obviously Hofstede is the most popularly talked about, but I did flash to you, we did discuss in class how there were alternatives, and you should be aware of their alternatives to identifying cultural differences. For example, Hall is one of these others, and Hall identified high context cultures versus low context cultures in communications. We also talked about Trompenaar or Cluckhorn and the globe model. So make sure you're aware of those. The next topic we talked about was the art of war. There's 13 different chapters. Some of the chapters were more important than others. We talked about the difference between business and military as far as strategies and how they're similar. Then we talked about Guanxi and how Guanxi is now a vital part of any business going around the world, not just in China, but it is still a huge core concept of Chinese business. And then we got into the Chinese management. Last week we talked about that. And this week we're going to talk more about Chinese management. Chinese management, reforming managerial mechanisms of Chinese state enterprises, comparative Chinese management systems. But with this was prepared by teaching assistants and the students, and it's prepared from some of the books that are very good, but a little bit dated. It can be confusing, so I want to start with trying to clarify my interpretation of what it is. Yes, organizations have to generally follow the government. That goes anywhere in the world. Forget China, any organization has to follow the government. And all organizations should be run by the best people to do it. Whoever starts the business will choose the best person for it. If you start a business, you will want your family to have control and get the benefit. That goes for any country in the world, any company in the world. If you are going to be trying to grow, you know that you must learn new things and develop. That goes from everywhere. The confusion comes, in my opinion, from the fact that people outside of China, just hearing some stories, make misunderstandings about the realities. Number one, Chinese people, as we saw last week, don't go off and brag. I showed you some of the world's biggest companies are Chinese, but yet they don't promote the fact that they are Chinese. They don't promote the fact to the whole world, look at me, look at me, look at me. Well, it's the same thing with their stories and the same thing with their management styles, and it's the same thing with all of what they've learned. Other countries will promote, I am the best, this is the best in the world, we should do it this way. Well, Chinese will be different. That is a misunderstanding. Information is not easy to find about the Chinese. However, what information is easy in 2013 is anything connected to the smartphones. You can use the internet to find almost any information. You can learn almost anything. But some people don't have time to go to school and learn about social media. Some people don't have time to go to school and learn all of this class and all of these details are online for free. Some of these people don't have access to the internet. And some companies or workers are so busy trying to take their bread from the oven out to the customer, they don't have time to check what's the newest type of flour or rice or oven or marketing. And so even though they're doing a good job with their bakery, they don't have time to learn what's the greatest. But you all know there's companies like consulting companies, McKinsey, and there's universities that study what is the best. What I think is a huge difference is in China, the government has stayed the same for a long time. They know what's good and bad. They know that they have to get the newest, greatest information. And so that same government has departments in charge of learning what's the greatest information. They have departments that learn this social media stuff. They have departments to learn about merit-based system or individual-based system or all of these differences that we talked about. There are huge departments that learn about that. So the experts of the world will go to those few people and tell them what's the latest and greatest. And then those few people that have the best information, it's their job in the Chinese government to take that limited information and give it to the companies. So yes, there's two types of management in a lot of Chinese companies. There's the actual baker that's taking the bread out of the oven and selling it, but then you also have a guy from the government coming and telling them you could use better flour and you can use better marketing. So it does work with the government, but it's in a good way because they're coming with information and tips and tricks. Please don't misunderstand that as we go through. Here is a video, and it's talking about financial markets. It's related to today. Is there a student here that wants to discuss any of this? Anybody ready to discuss part of these points? Give you a few seconds to respond. Some students created this. If you want to talk about it, fine. Otherwise, what this is talking about is motivations of the public sector in China. It's explaining the public aspects of business. If you want more information, you can take a look at this. Overall, management has changed, but management always changes. Governments generally always change. The difference is in democratic societies, management might change every couple of years or sometimes every couple of months. But yes, the Chinese system, you'll have people around for a lot longer, and it's that control by a few people for a lot longer. And so they've learned what was a good style and adapted accordingly. They started by copying the Soviet model of management and thinking that maybe there's the socialist style which was good. The model was large, medium-sized, state-owned enterprises. You get the central government which learns these top secrets and the best way to do things. They would come in, they would manage these, and have it disseminated for the most amount of people possible. And there's a lot of people that think that's reasonable. It makes sense. There's a lot of people that think we should go back to that system. Because we've tried and we've got the people promoting, let's do it this way, this way, this way, and now we look at them and they're failing. Or we look at them and we see those companies have bankrupted the world. World's financial crisis, for example. So some people are saying we need to go back to it. However, it does talk about how there's the executive authority was concentrated in the hands of directors, the so-called one director management system. Some people talk about it being authoritarian or dictatorial, which are kind of negative words. Other people will call it paternalistic or fatherly in a positive way. It depends on your view. Even though this model is considered as foundational for the current management practices, and it's contributed to the industrial development in China since the 1950s, it has been bureaucratic. It is top-down, but as I said, it's top-down in the sense that a few people at the top can get this powerful information, the newest, greatest secrets and tips, and then they are disseminated through their ranks to others. Hopefully you're all aware that the government also has a merit-based system. A lot of people in the States, they will think it doesn't, but it's called the organizational department. There's organizational departments in the government that will find people that are doing well and have the good scores in school and can manage other people, and they will give them greater and greater responsibilities from very, very low levels. But with over 1 billion people in China, local geographic areas will find and cultivate the greatest people within your area and promote you to these top positions. And once you get to the geographical top of your area, your geographical government member will tell the top government member who you are and what your abilities are. And then you're going to be competing with the top people from around the whole country in all geographical parts of China. And then you will be able to get positions or chances to run these big companies or state-owned enterprises. And it is, in some sense, top-down. There's the best possible person to run things coming from the lowest level up, and information is coming from the bottom, from the top of the government down to you at the same time. It says here that it's not appropriate management style for Chinese, as it relied heavily on technically trained managers, but don't misunderstand these details. Make sure you're aware of how, at least in the Eastern view, it's viewed as superior. The Western view will view the Western style as superior, and if you study just the Western English information, you might be biased to think the Western is best. But there's a lot of people that are in the Eastern system or aware of the Eastern system that definitely think the Eastern way is the best. So this particular system was weakened throughout the changes, which continue to happen. 1956, 1961, it strengthened the role of the factory, the party committee, and the workers' participation. A lot of people said big problems were related to government. The government's not very, very good in China. But I can't remember a time when China closed because the government stopped working for the last 2 weeks. You guys are aware of what I'm referring to, right? What am I referring to? United States basically closed for business for the last 2 weeks because the government took all control and gave it to one person, and it was as his decision whether to continue working or not. Just one person in the United States, in our democracy, and he decided he didn't like what was going on, so he closed the business for 2 weeks. That type of thing should be considered when you're comparing it with these Chinese management models. So, the structural problems of the CSE. Make sure we're aware that CSE is the Chinese state-owned enterprise, or more people refer to it as SOE, state-owned enterprise. Many, many years ago, it was operated in a different way. They tried something, it didn't work. They're trying something again, it didn't work. 1978, 1979, they started to make huge new changes, big changes, which were starting what we're dealing with today, but it changed things after the Cultural Revolution, where managers were discredited while the representatives of the revolutionary workers, the government workers, were given power to control, subject to the guidance of whoever was following the government. That is definitely changing. The current system was changed for sure. China was not able to manage efficiently with the numerous models which were adopted, so people were in functional departments, acted in their professional capacity to provide guidance around the world. In some sense, it makes sense. If you are part of this huge company or huge country where your access to information is very limited, you can't get access to the latest information, you can't get access to the greatest information, you do whatever you think is best. But if you don't have that education, you might be doing things that are okay, but in some sense they're ignorant to better ways. So people from the top that have access to the McKinsey consulting and the greatest brains of the world and the greatest universities in the world, they will learn in the central government and disseminate that. Some people question the efficiency of that. However, the fact that it is growing, it's one of the most powerful organizations in the world, most powerful countries in the world, is able to speak for itself. People in functional departments acted in the professional capacity of providing guidance and advice to both the superiors and the subordinates. It says no authority, but don't misunderstand, it's a collective unit. The local worker that's managing the work of the company, that baker, is not just a nobody baker. A lot of the time in state-owned enterprises, they were promoted through their grades in school and through their performance and leadership of all of their other students, their peers, and leadership of businesses at the beginning. Geographically, they excelled. They were the best managers. So they headed the business for the work practical side. And there's the different government side that came through the organizational department. And the government side was updating that person with the newest details. Each factory had an independent managing system, and their levels of specialization and socialization which were very low. Again, it might be confusing. Each department in the company might be run in a certain way with the best possible person to do it, but they're also getting tips from other people coming from the government. Just like social media, just like management information systems. A top CEO might be able to lead and speak well, but he might not be the best person for the computer programming or for the IT department, so you'll have people coming from the top government down to teach you about those things. The structural problems with these state-owned enterprises, again, there were some structural problems originally. The most prominent problem was the existence of the party structure in each enterprise, which operated parallel to the administrative system that I was talking about. In the course of management reform, the factory directors who wanted to get back at their management, they would try to do both. They would try to manage hard and get a foot in the door of the top management office in government to learn these greatest things. It is definitely, don't misunderstand, I'm not saying they're all angels. It's definitely connected to Guanxi. But while Guanxi means you need to be connected to others and to manage well, you have to have a network of many people. Everybody's reasonable. You know if there's a stupid person beside you, that Guanxi is not going to be as good as somebody that's very, very intelligent and has Guanxi. So it's a balance. Sometimes you try to do both. Not only the party system, but the state-owned enterprises also had to support activities of 2 additional systems that were not linked to the core business activities, or many systems like the IT, or like the environment, or like departments that would be caring for pollution control, or unemployment. All of the best secrets might be available in the top-level government and is disseminated down. In 1979, there was the consensus among the Chinese leaders that the management system should be reformed. By mid-1979, they started to experiment with some management powers over the production and marketing of all products. In 84, they had some experiments. The Party Central Committee passed major policies, China's economic structure reform. There's many. And you've heard of the 5-year plans, and you've heard of a lot of the ways where they were giving ownership of the local communities to the farmers. That started, as we found with Hofstede and his paper, Asian Management in the 21st Century. He showed that whole process started 100 years ago, back in the 1700s with the Red Dream, where the powerful people in Beijing had lots of land. The land wasn't being managed very, very well, so they started to give the land, the shared ownership, to the workers and say, you can have it, just give me 10% of whatever you make and you can keep the rest. So they started working very, very well. And we're moving back to that same style in 1978-79. Obviously it developed. In 88, we had more government that was passing more laws on how to develop and how people for the country could develop. Laws stipulated enterprises are socialist commodity production. We're still supposed to be taking care of the whole community, but there was accounting which operated independently. According to investigations in 89, 60% of production in the majority of state-owned enterprises was already made in accordance to their own plans. In the 1990s, more policies had been issued to revitalize large and medium-sized state-owned enterprises, including measures from 1991, 20 different policies in September, which gave more powers. It continues to this day. More and more laws, more and more reforms are starting. Yesterday, we had a conference. We were talking about what is the best thing for China to do with intellectual property rights. Should they be having more of the property rights they have in North America? And they were discussing how, well, more protection might be good, but you get to a point where it's bad. How could that be possible? How can you protect your intellectual property and be bad? Well, it goes hand in hand with the amount of lawyers' work, the litigation. As soon as you start getting secrets and protecting that, you protect it from anybody else to benefit. That goes against the whole idea. Supposed to be encouraging people to develop, encouraging people to invent new things so the whole world can grow. And whoever made that should get a lot of benefits. But soon as so many lawyers start hiding that or protecting it just for the one person. As soon as anybody starts using it or getting benefit from it in some ways and suing these other people, the litigation that we have in some countries, the whole world growth slows down. It's interesting to take a look at what is the growth that we have in the litigation, in the legal system in North America. Very, very slow, almost negative. What's the growth we have in China? It's super, super high. These measures, many companies have been reforming. Reforms continue. Regardless of the fact whether they achieve these advances or not, there's still a majority of problems, and they're trying to deal with it. That goes anywhere in the world, obviously. They've not been able to adapt to the changes and demands of the market, and they may be inferior to competitors as a result. That's a quote that would definitely be popular among the West. The West would be saying, I'm the best, they're not. Please don't be too biased about that. Please understand the fact that a lot of people in China think anybody that's bragging too much probably doesn't have the real quality. A lot of people understand, what's the expression in Chinese or in Korean? The apple doesn't need to advertise, it just falls straight from the tree. Or the peach just falls from the tree. You don't need to go very far. If you have quality, you don't need to promote it or advertise it very much. Top universities, top companies, they don't advertise very much in East Asia versus North America. It doesn't mean they're bad, it just means that's one of the ways that they used to do it. If they're changing, that might be different. Many of the inferior competitors to state-owned enterprises could not compete effectively due to their low quality, dated stocks, backward sales methods, maybe. But again, we were coming from an area in 1978, 1979, where there was almost no quality stuff and they had to start from scratch. Now that they have some of the world's best companies and the best products, obviously this can't be repeated. And the fact that a lot of the state-owned enterprises own most of, or much of the rest of the world speaks for itself. Incentives of managers to work in many state-owned enterprises definitely does not remain low, because you realize that getting the best information is with the government. You get in with the government, you have the most stable position, the most stable pay, you have probably the best benefits. It might not be the highest pay. Multinational companies might pay more, but they won't get the direct benefits of the top consultants, and the top universities of the world will come to the governments first, give that information to them, have the laws made by the government organizations, and then it ripple effects going over to the private companies. So a lot of people, just like in Korea, several years ago the best job you can get in Korea was to work for the government. One of the most competitive exams to get in was the government entrance exam. It's the same thing over there. So you can't say getting a government job in Korea is no good or it's not competitive when everybody knows that that's one of the most attractive things there is. The incentives of managers and workers in many state-owned enterprises remain low. May be true. The government in China does try to still look for the benefit of the whole country. In some ways, it's still socialist. And with that, they don't have the incentives that you have with Larry Ellison. Anybody aware of who Larry Ellison is? Social media, data management, data analytics. Who is Larry Ellison? Anybody? Any guess? I see a couple of people want to say something. Really? Larry Ellison is the head of Oracle. Oracle is one of the biggest data analytics companies, just like SAP out of Germany. Larry Ellison is from the United States, managing this Oracle company, data analytics company in the United States. On average, I believe he's been paid more than $150 million every year for many, many years. $150 million salary every year. Plus, the company gives him his jets and his yachts and stuff like that. So yes, Chinese state-owned enterprises don't have those type of incentives. They don't have those type of pay packages. Usually, the CEOs in Japan, Korea, and in China have a much, much smaller pay package compared to North American paid CEOs. Whether that's good or not can be debated. What do you think? Is it better to have the whole country having $100 million CEO pay or not? Any concept, any suggestions here? Yes?
I don't think it's good because it might not discourage the other workers too. Because for usually CEO, like the normal worker doesn't get to that level in their working.
Normal workers are normal workers. They don't get to become the top CEO unless they have the best talents or the best Guanxi and many other factors that we were talking about before. Yes?
So if the CEO is getting too much money from the company, it will just let down the other worker and not. And think that, oh, we will never be like similar as them.
It will demotivate the rest of the workers. A lot of the workers, what is that called? What are we talking about now? We'll have one person that's very, very different versus lots of people are working like this, and these people, that group of people will think that they'll never be basically the same as this, and this really isn't good. They prefer to work in harmony with others. This is this, right? Individualism versus collectivism. Yes, you might call this as a hierarchical, but when we talk about this pay package, some of you are interested in doing, again, your reports on management of the top executives. Again, this summarizes a lot of the details very easily. As it says here, just by chance, example 2.1, Larry Ellison of Oracle Company, his pay in 2007, many years ago, it's definitely gone up. I believe it goes up on average from 5 to 17% increases every year. His pay was $192,920,000 a year. So that type of thing, Starbucks is also an American company. The CEO there gets $98 million, and there's many other companies like that. So that doesn't happen in China. What does usually happen, generally, it's interesting. Again, what we see here is, I don't need to show you all of the details. If you want more details, you can get the book and you can take a look at it online. In general, in the United States, you see, or in the United States, it's about 30% of total pay is fixed pay. And then you'll have another 40-50% of the pay is in variable pay, which generally means hidden pay. Like your special things, like getting a special jet, or having the company give you a house, or special stock options. Part of that will be the perks. But perks alone in the United States just account for something like 3%. Most of the pay is kind of hidden pay. What is the situation in Korea? What do you think is the situation in Japan? What do you think is the situation in Hong Kong? Anywhere? Any guesses? What is the situation in other countries?
There's more fixed salary than the variable.
Definitely. In South Korea, fixed pay is almost 70% of the total pay. So that everybody, when they see your pay package in the newspapers, that is almost everything you get. But what you see in the newspapers of the North American CEOs, that pay package is a very small portion of the true amount of cash they're getting. In Japan, do you think it's higher or lower than in Korea? Lower? Higher? Okay. Let's take a look at which culture might be more traditional. Which culture is more focused on harmony? Which culture is more avoiding of risk or harming somebody's face? Reputation? Japan. So if Japan is more focused on keeping harmony, it makes sense that Japan will not try to have too much hidden. It's closer to 80% of the total pay in Japan is fixed. So those type of things relate here. Please note those things. And I highly suggest you guys reference that book, extra reading material. It talks about backward sales methods. Again, some of these books and the materials, they will be saying these things in English, made by English people. How can you say backward sales methods about the companies that have the greatest sales in the world, the most sales in the world? If it's backward, maybe the whole world should be changing direction. Low levels of efficiency and economic benefits are plaguing many of the state-owned enterprises. May be true. Any comments? How could you get more efficiency in a corporation? Why may a corporation in China have lower efficiency than a corporation in Silicon Valley? There's a lot of information out there in the news saying that East Asian companies are just having one person controlling everything, and that's not good. There's a lot of information out there that's saying North America and Europe is democratic and that democracy is the best. However, I started the class talking about the democracy of the United States legally had laws passed through the Senate to allow all control to be sent to one person, and that one person closed down the country for 2 weeks. Is that democratic? I'm not sure. Some people could argue about it. Also, the idea of merit-based. Yes, in the United States, if you are incredibly smart, if you're incredibly innovative, you can go from anywhere and develop. However, you still need the Guanxi, you still need the connections to develop. A lot of people would associate something that's here, again, it's figure 5.2, corporate governance. It's mostly talking about the Western style of management. They would say that democracy equals a merit-based system. And the best companies in the world are run in a way that the shareholders will pay and vote for what is most democratic and what's most reasonable. Well, I've already showed you that some of these companies are taking pay that makes no sense whatsoever. There's no way that you could say any person in the world is 72 million times better than the average worker. Not the worst worker, the average worker. You can't say that somebody deserves that high pay based on just merit alone. Maybe there's a few people that can do some things, yes. But another thing is the whole idea of the stock market. If we say that the merit-based system in North America is based on the stock market, and that's based on the merit-based system, that's based on democracy, people can vote for what's good or bad, we understand that if you like companies, you go to the experts. The experts, who are the experts? They are the stockbrokers, and they tell you only 3 things. You can buy a company's stock, you can just hold it, do nothing with it, or you can sell it. There's only 3 things you can possibly do with it. 33% this, this, and this, that is reasonable. Then why is it that throughout most of history, there's less than 2% of all of these experts ever saying sell? Even Enron and WorldCom, those experts were saying either buy or hold a day, 24 hours before the company went bankrupt. And they knew, it has been proven, they knew the company was technically bankrupt. Because those democratic societies are based in ways that some people don't understand. For example, those expert advisors or the credit advisors, who makes that rating, what's good or bad? They make the rating based on the CEOs paying them. If they don't pay them, they don't do the rating. They pay whoever gets the highest rating. The Chinese system doesn't have as much of that, so you might want to consider those details. That whole idea of efficiency. It might be good to do other things. Another thing that's completely different than the democracy could be the socialist. Is it bad to have a socialist system? Well, if you're just a family person taking care of your family, you only want to take care of your family. But what if you have a handicapped child? Should you let that person starve? No, you should be taking care of them. Well, now what if you're the head of the whole organization or the country? You should be trying to take care of people, right? But what if you could bring something in that could feed everybody very, very efficiently? All you have to do is walk up to this machine and it gives you the perfect food and everybody's happy. Nobody has to worry about cooking or cleaning. The machine can do it quickly. But then again, you're forgetting about that handicapped child in the wheelchair can't get up to that machine. Maybe it sounds unrealistic. Well, what about robots? What about the technology that automates companies? As soon as you bring in those robots, as soon as you bring in that automated efficiency, it raises efficiency, yes, but it puts hundreds of the local workers in that community out of work and they starve. So if we restrict some communities that need to feed these people, if we restrict that type of automation in those areas in order to provide food, that could be considered good management. It might not be efficient for price. It might not be efficient for the CEO's pay, but it's considered efficient for the most workers. Make sure you're looking at the different views all the time. In 1990, more than 30% of the state-owned enterprises were reported to be making a loss. Okay, then we get back to these companies like Larry Ellison making almost $200 million in pay just for him. But his company says he's making a profit just to keep the shareholders happy. And Apple is doing the same thing, right? Apple is supposed to be one of the biggest companies in the world. And Apple's supposed to be a pretty profitable company. Well, what happened in the last year or the last 2 years? A lot of people identified that Apple had their revenues or their profits go through Ireland and other countries where they could have tax shelters and they don't have to report that. They don't pay the taxes. So they tell the world, despite the truth of their profits, they tell the world that they don't have much profit. So why would we be trying to hide profits if that's good management? Or in the other sense, in reality, what do you have? You have sales or revenue and your expenses or your investments in your business and then your profits. But if you're really trying to just grow the society, why would you not take the profits and put it back into growing the business, making more factories? So they may have losses, but make sure you understand they're also the fastest growing companies or country in the world, right? Whereas North America was growing at 1%, 2%, 3%, maybe 4% if they're super lucky and dreaming. Since generally 1978, China has been growing on average about 10% a year. Now it will be down lower to 8, maybe 7%, but it has been growing incredibly fast. Problems can be explained in several reasons. First, the state-owned enterprises not really had the independent units of production because they didn't obtain that true autonomy, maybe. Second, officials of these higher-level institutions tended to increase the base figures of the responsibility contracts and increase the burden placed on enterprises. There's several reasons. For example, the planning system. There are a lot of changes, and the planning system, again, don't forget, in the government, that planning system, or the organizational department, will find the people geographically that are the most talented and have the highest intelligence and capabilities, and then bring them up into the top government organizations for the consultants to teach them what to do, and they will be in charge of disseminating that information everywhere. So the planning is interesting to take a look at. And again, when we say that the state-owned enterprises have not established good sales mechanisms, it may be because we're saying it's better if we have the robots. However, sometimes you want to think about feeding more people or giving more jobs to more people. What's the unemployment in China versus the unemployment in Montreal? I believe in Montreal is what, 27% unemployment? Student and youth unemployment is the worst, and I was talking about average. Unemployment in the United States is a huge issue. Some of these things might be turning around and starting to copy this system again. When I'm talking about management, make sure you understand there's two different things. If you want to just manage a business for you or for your friends or your family, that may be different than managing things for society, right? What you decide to do is up to you. More details to talk about. There is the straight line functional model where departments and management levels were just set up so that the government can disseminate information. It may seem irrational, but it's set up for the dissemination of information. Sixth, there is social burdens that you have to worry about, making sure that people are provided with food and health care. Is there health care in North America right now? Maybe not. Is there health care in China? Almost everybody has access to this. It's automatic. A lot of the people, even the farmers in remote villages, some of you were with me when we went to Chongqing and Chengdu in China, and we saw remote areas of China that the poorest farmers still have access to a lot of these medical benefits, just like in Korea. The national insurance program here provides such good care that my father was a doctor, my family, I prefer to get treated here, and the hospital that I grew up with, the head nurse was the mother of my best friend. She had cancer in Canada, and she came to Korea and China to get treatment. So there may be better ways of doing things and certain efficiencies, but you might want to check what's going on. Seventh, material incentives. Social, psychological, scientific, managerial methods, they might have challenges. The educational system might have challenges. Some people would be complaining about that in the old system. Yes, the old system. The Cultural Revolution, there was no education. Cultural Revolution, everything stopped. However, we look at the OECD, basically the United Nations organization that studies the world. Where is the best education? The best education in the world is where? Which city? Anybody know, honestly? You study every high school in the world. Every high school student's test scores, your SAT scores. The highest scores, we have one vote for India. Interesting. We watched 2 million minutes over here, and India was good. Yes? China. Which city in China? Shanghai has the highest or the best test results in the world for education. Overall countries, it's Korea and Finland, but Shanghai is generally the highest as a city. So things have changed enormously. When you're doing your papers, make sure you understand, even though some of these books are only a few years old, things are happening so fast with technology and things are changing so fast. Don't just read something and then regurgitate it. Think about how things have changed. You guys know some of these details. Make sure that your papers reflect that. In the early 1990s, there were big changes in revitalization of the state-owned enterprises, especially the large and medium-sized state-owned enterprises. They became a top priority for the Chinese leadership to become competitive globally, and they have done so. It's interesting, the largest corporations in China are generally the state-owned enterprises, and if they are so bad, it's very interesting to know that almost all of them are paying Larry Ellison. What's happening there? Any ideas? Anybody understand what I just said? SOEs are paying Larry Ellison's salary. What does that mean in regular talk? Who is Larry Ellison? What is SOE? It's not SOL, that's a completely different acronym. State-owned companies, yes. And almost all of them in China, they're huge. They're almost all paying Larry Ellison, or another hint, SAP. Oracle and SAP. We get back to this, social media, data management. They're paying millions and millions of dollars to the world's best companies, and SAP actually from Germany is, I believe, doing better than Larry Ellison in China, but they're all paying money to those firms because they're supposed to be the best management systems in the world. They collect all of the information of the world, big data, process it with millions of dollars of technology and programming, and spit out what are the best ways to work and manage. Almost every single state-owned enterprise, Chinese state company, is using this. So it's the best technologies and management advice, management systems you can get in the world. I challenge anybody to say today, 2013, Chinese companies are poorly run when they have these capabilities. Please make sure that stays in mind. Smaller companies are different. Almost all small companies, almost all CFBs don't have a connection with Larry Ellison. Why? Could be an exam question next week. There's something I never, the answer is not direct. It's not in the textbook. You need to think about something and think about something else and put it together. All of the entrepreneurial businesses in China, or CFBs, Chinese family businesses, don't use Oracle.
They just want to share within themselves.
They want to share within themselves? Maybe. Most of the family businesses want the money to stay inside? Maybe. That is definitely changing. You can read lots here. Yes?
They do not want to spend that much money on management.
If you're right, exactly. The small businesses can't spend that much money. Usually it costs a minimum of $1 million to get Larry Ellison's program, like an Excel program, to manage all of that big data. So what do? There's millions, not millions, there's many, many thousands of companies in China that are small Chinese companies that are trying to make something like SAP, but it only costs a couple $100 or a couple $1,000. So they're using those small Chinese firms to provide this data analytics or the big data management programs. It's a customized Chinese-style system for the small business. How big are most, or the average, typical, traditional Chinese family business?
8.
8 people, on average. If you only have 8 people, you're not going to spend $1 million just to get a computer program to help those guys make decisions. Here is an interesting chart. Government measures to reform the Chinese state enterprises or state-owned enterprises and their likely impacts. Power to manage production, power to make investment decisions, pricing products, power to import and export. So they were given these things. Any questions about some of these details? Any comments about any of these things? Summaries of some of these things? Yes?
This Chinese family business consists of at least 8 people? Isn't it 9?
The textbook says the average size is 8. The textbook is a little bit dated. Things are changing. If you want the recent information is here. This is a great student's paper talking about that. They studied the fastest growing, a typical entrepreneurial firm or family firm in Hong Kong and mainland China. It's not saying at least, it's saying the average. Yes? There are some concerns other than this. Concerns that you have with state-owned enterprises is not only should they streamline things and try to have the best management, you may want to reduce the administration, you may want to reduce the organizational management of the government, especially with now you have the technology and the computer information, so you can set it up so every state-owned enterprise can just have a computer link where the government is getting the best information and they're giving them these training techniques online. You might not need the special staff inside. You might be able to delete or manage differently life support with the government or the social political support system. Also reduce operational functions focusing on your comparative advantage. As you see that there's some of the world's biggest corporations now are the Chinese. Most of them are in the power electricity generation. That's interesting. What is one of the biggest power generation projects in the world? If the world's biggest companies are usually power generation or energy companies like Shell or BP Energy or Exxon, companies like that. Where's the biggest energy project in the world? Power generation project generally in the world? China. Good guess. Any idea where? Anybody like water? Three Gorges Dam. That Three Gorges Dam is one of the biggest power projects in the world. So having those type of things, the comparative advantages, having the size of the country. Obviously, if you're a small little country like Singapore, you can't compete. So having that huge size, having that huge amount of money, having that huge amount of resources, having that huge amount of workers, having that huge amount of growth and hard-working people, you can have special comparative advantages. And they are starting to focus more and more on just developing what is their comparative advantage. In the past, just like Korea, how did Korea grow? The government said you had to diversify, you have to raise the whole country. So Hyundai, Samsung, all of the top chaebol, they started the same way. You had to, in order to get money from the government, in order to get support from the government, in order to get the government secrets for growth, you had to grow everything. Eventually, after the country grew, then the government allowed you to focus in one area, but still, by chance, these big chaebols, the conglomerates in Korea, are still doing many things. Well, China's the same way. They're changing from doing everything to streamlining. It's a natural process. It's hard to just sell off everything. That whole idea of going through managing everything and the percent ownership is the other thing. I'd like to remind you of this picture that's not the state-owned enterprises, but this is just the Chinese family businesses. Generally, all of the overseas Chinese. I think this is incredibly important. And this comes from Bloomberg a while ago. And it shows, it's quite interesting. In Thailand, it's very, very impressive. 8% of people in China, 8% of people in Thailand control 80% of the wealth. Are we getting better or worse as we go to Indonesia? Really? Really? Well, what do you mean by worse for Indonesian people or worse for promoting China? If we're talking about promoting China, it's better, right? It just means the people there are even more powerful because there's half as many people controlling just as much, 75%. And in the Philippines, it's even more so. Half of those people, very, very few people, are controlling even almost the same amount. It's really, really interesting. And again, it's generally based on the fact that the Chinese organizations are able to work with the socialist system. They don't have the huge profits. They work with the Guanxi, and that alone means they have connections to the people that make these things, maybe with the huge factories in China, but they charge very, very low profits, almost no profit, and they provide it to the customers at such a good deal that becomes the base for everybody to use you. You have the lowest priced product around, everybody's going to buy from you. And so if your business fails, the whole country's business fails. If you can't supply the light bulbs anymore at almost no profit, there's no more light bulbs going to be able to be provided. So it has become ingrained. Nobody talks about where light bulbs come from. Nobody really talks about where the pencils come from, where the desks and things come from. But these basic infrastructure, it's very interesting. There are discussion questions at the end of the textbook. It says that the role of the Chinese state-owned enterprises will diminish. What do you think? What do you think? Do you think Chinese state-owned enterprises are going to be getting smaller and less powerful? What are your comments? Take 2 or 3 comments from you, and then we'll go for a break. How's that for motivation?
If Chinese family business grows bigger, I think the state-owned enterprise will grow smaller.
Okay. Good. Do Do you think the Chinese government should be trying to promote that?
Promote the family business, you mean?
Yes.
Yes, because their cultural aspect is that they regard the family business as important, I guess.
Yes, that's good. The Chinese government, the Chinese culture thinks the family unit is most important, so you should be promoting and taking care of the family unit. So encouraging families to have their own companies to take care of themselves is incredibly important. As the family businesses increase in number and increase in size and increase in efficiency, these huge monster companies aren't needed as much to take care of them, so just naturally they will just shrink in size in reverse proportions. That's one argument. Any other arguments? Yes?
I think CSEs are going to get stronger and getting bigger because,
Kick them, sure. Kick them, sure. Why?
family businesses are doing well too, but then CSEs are more powerful in getting government support, like exactly like Samsung in Korea.
Yeah, okay, the argument is that Chinese state-owned enterprises are huge. They're the government, and they are controlled by the government. Bigger is better in many ways. Economies of scale. And now we have more and more globalization. The borders are disappearing. We have more and more of this trade all the time. Like Canada and Europe has signed the multilateral, the free trade agreements and things like that. Now that you can get your parts from anywhere in the world, your supplies from anywhere in the world, your workers can come from anywhere in the world, and competition comes from everywhere in the world, that means that the local businesses are going to always kind of have a disadvantage for some place that is sitting on top of the oil mine. Or you'll have a disadvantage to the place that's sitting on top of the gold mine. Or you'll have a disadvantage to the country that is poor and has the lower paid workers. If you grow and you don't have all of those things, or your resources are being used, there's always going to be some other developing country that might be able to provide it better or cheaper. So what the argument is that the government needs to keep some huge powerful companies that are able to go buy these things that the small businesses can't. What's happening with most of the mines? Where does most electricity come from? A lot of electricity in the world comes from coal, right? Rocks. Just burning these rocks. It might not be good for the environment, but that's one of the best, most popular ways for electricity production. And it's most popular in China. So they will try to dig a lot of coal, but you will run out. So a lot of these resources you have to get from other countries. So the state-owned enterprises are going to other countries and buying all of those resources. Most of Australia's biggest mines are now owned by China. A lot of Canada's biggest mines are owned by China. Canada's biggest diamond mine, although it's called the Canadian diamond, is Chinese. Canada's biggest energy, some of the biggest energy companies that are making electricity, they're called the Canadian enterprises or Canadian Solar and things like that, but they're Chinese. Ingyu, did you have any comments about what were those, what was it, Canadian Solar? Who owns that?
Canadian Solar?
I believe you did a project on that last term talking about how the Chinese organizations own some of the world's biggest energy producers in the world, named in the local country's name, but it's Chinese owned.
Yeah, like Suntech Solar?
Suntech was one of them, yes. So more and more you need these big corporations that have the money, have the budgets, and have the power with World Trade Organization restrictions, etc., that can go to the other side of the world and get the resources your society needs. Something to think of. Completely opposite arguments. Something to think about. A few more things about Chinese management. After we finish this Chinese management information, I would like to hear if you have some comments or suggestions or interesting educational details you have identified in your groups. We are now coming into a new section where we're talking about this. I believe we've already covered some of this based on research, 200 Chinese businesses. Yura, Mac, did you guys want to add something to this? Yes? Feel free to come on up and make a couple of comments.
Okay, so I'm just going to explain very briefly about this video. So as it says on the explanation next to the video, the caption, Ms. Cha explains why people are motivated to work in the public sector in China. And she talks about the support by the Chinese government on the Chinese state enterprises. So, yeah, basically, that's why the Chinese state enterprises are so large in China. And to add on to the video, I think that's why the Chinese state enterprises will still grow in China, and the role of the Chinese state enterprises won't diminish.
Great. Just before break, we had two different views talking about this. That's a very good point. Some people say that the family is the heart of the country, so family businesses will grow. But also, we already admitted, even in Korea, a lot of people really, really want to have government jobs. And because of that being the norm, it's going to be hard to stop that. So they will continue to be very large for a long time. Great.
I'm going to talk about another video on Chinese business succession, and this video it's like an interview by a professor of Chinese University of Hong Kong, and he's basically saying that how the Chinese family successfully pass on their family wealth and family business to the next generation. And he emphasized three important institutional building tasks, and that are first, family governance, how to create and enforce the mechanism to harmonize the relationship of the family members, and to consolidate opinions or to facilitate decision making. And second, ownership design, making sure that the business ownership is within the ownership and control of future generation family members. The distribution of the family ownership among the family can affect the incentives and outcomes of the family business performance. For example, there is a mechanism of the family trust ownership in Hong Kong, but family trust ownership was designed in the West. So he's saying that it doesn't fit in Chinese context. And the last one is corporate governance. Before passing on the leadership and the ownership, he also needs to help, he means the CEOs, also need to help building a professional management team to assist his children to run the business in the future. So how do they recruit or motivate these non-family professional managers? Or how do they monitor these professional managers, and what jobs do you give them is something that is very important to think about. So basically, chapter 10 was about Chinese family business and Chinese state enterprises. And in the introduction, the critical thing is they both have confusion ethics, because it's the center of Southeast and East Asian culture. So overall, overseas Chinese minority differ management style with mainland Chinese due to the different social environment and systems. For example, the indigenous people in East Asian countries, they're unfriendly to the overseas Chinese. So the overseas Chinese feel insecure. But then at the same time, they can enjoy the capitalism that the mainland Chinese cannot have. And there are two major forms of Chinese companies, as I told you before. So now we're going to talk about organizational structures and management process and professor is going to continue. Thank you.
Organizational structures, the Chinese business. We know that there's the two different acronyms. There's the CFB, which is the Chinese family business, and the Chinese state-owned enterprise, or the SOE. The family business, it's usually, of course, the family business, the family properties. That is changing more and more. The control remains with the family, but you will have more and more professional managers coming on board. The Chinese state-owned enterprises, yes, the organization it's government. The CEO is generally appointed by the state. It's not necessarily an arbitrary thing. It's not necessarily somebody is getting the job just because they're friends of somebody else. That may be reported in the news, but usually that is impossible because it's geographically set up and managed through the organizational departments of the government, so that each geographic part of the country will have kids competing in schools to have the honor roll students. Those honor roll students that have the best experience with the best jobs, they prove themselves, then they are noticed by the local government officers, and then they are appointed up to the higher levels of society in the central government. So that is where they will be appointing people from. How big is the company? As we just found out, since most people in China are very eager and happy to work for the government, there's going to be a lot of staff wanting to work for them, and as we have more and more of these firms growing, they can become some of the world's largest firms. Chinese family businesses generally are small, however. On average, it's 8 or 9 people. Some of them could be big. Obviously, there are some family businesses that are multinational companies. You've heard of most of Hong Kong being controlled by a Chinese family. And you've heard of several people in each of these, the Philippines, for example, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand. Those are countries with a lot of family-run businesses, but they're controlling a huge part of the country. Overall, the family business is simple. You will try to have it as simple as possible. Yes, you will still have a lot of the ownership controlled by the main person from the family that started, or the founder, and they want to make sure things are run well, so they'll bring in the managers to give advice and help manage, but the ultimate big decisions are usually saved by those people. So it's simple in that sense. In Korea, it's probably the simplest, because in Korea, the idea of even Samsung today and Hyundai today being controlled by the family and promoting kids or grandkids to top positions, those individual people could get advice from several others, but the advice, the final decision, is made just by the family. It's very, very simple. State-owned enterprises, as I mentioned, are complicated structures. They are not only run by very talented people, but they'll have different running systems where they continue to get information provided from the government, like the consulting reports, information, the application of Guanxi, for example. And again, it's hard to get away from your roots. It's hard to get away from who you are. Most people in East Asia have been brought up for the last 2,000, 3,000 years with the teachings of Confucius. Confucius had said things that made most people who they are, but it's not going to be set in stone. You are still going to be changing. You're still using technology. You're still using education. You are seeing now that people have the ability to do anything. So although they might have said the father has the power over the wife and the older has the power over the younger, you will still try to have harmony for that, but you will be based on reasonable things. Another thing that's Confucius-based that is changing is, in the past, it was saying that the family asset inheritance. Usually, when a founder develops a lot of assets, they will pass everything on just to the oldest son. Well, that is definitely changing. However, it's different in Japan and even in UK. It's saying that the system in the United Kingdom and Japan, where firstborn sons can assume inheritance of the family assets, nowadays it's changing where that senior son can be an adopted person, Or they could even be somebody from outside of the country that has obtained the role of being their senior son or the right-hand man just because they've developed so much loyalty with that person. In China, the biggest tendency is for the division throughout the main family. And that idea of the main family can be huge. It can be based on the geographic area. It's no longer just based on the oldest son. So family businesses are no longer passed down just from the one person to the oldest son. A lot more of these businesses are passed on to daughters. A lot more of these are passed on to the whole idea of the change. In the last several years, you could only have one child in China, so it's not an older son or a younger son. There's only one son to pass it on to. You have to consider these changes. Loyalty is hugely important. Obviously, with state-owned enterprises and family businesses, there will be authority at the top, and you may have hierarchical structures, but loyalty is very important. Soon as you start showing disloyalty and you're trying to be just the me getting ahead, if you're not taking care of the group in China, the government is going to be against you, and if you can't work with people, you won't have that image of being able to be a good leader, so you won't be able to practice and manage these operations. That's a big thing. In Korea, it's still very, very important. You will find, even if you are very, very, very talented, you don't copy the North American style where you just jump from job to job to job. You give your resume out to headhunters, and anytime you can get a better paying job, you change companies and you go somewhere else. As soon as you're seen as being disloyal in many places in East Asia, your future is really, really hurt. So much so that in Japan, a lot of university students and high school students, they might like the concept of traveling, but after you start working for an organization, a lot of people in Japan usually prefer not to travel anymore because they don't want to give up their position in the company. In North America, several years ago at least, if you have a job inside a company and then you go work for a branch in China or a branch in Africa or a branch somewhere else and you come back, you're rewarded with a higher position. In Japan, it's almost the opposite. Because when you leave the family, you're considered basically a traitor by several people. Not everybody, but some people. And so when you come back, your job is no longer there. And in China, a lot of people do jump from one low-level job to a higher-level job and a higher-level job, but that idea of getting top management position within Chinese firms is reduced because they see you're not loyal anymore. However, there's so many multinational companies coming into East Asia, having the experience in these might be attractive to the outsider that doesn't realize the importance of loyalty. So a lot of the Chinese that are joining the multinational companies might get great jobs there, but it might be hard to get back into the Chinese businesses. Please make sure you're aware of those when you're looking for your jobs. Of course, Guanxi is important. The more, the better. Successful overseas businesses. I showed you that picture from Bloomberg talking about 2% of Filipinos are Chinese that control 70% of the country. That is incredibly important to understand how successful overseas Chinese family businesses are. Using the local government support and the businesses as a catalyst. Again, they go in and they provide support for the government by giving the basic materials and infrastructure at very, very attractive costs, almost no markup. And because they give that base support or the foundational support, the government can now no longer work without you. So the government is connected to you. The same thing with the big businesses. They aim at the high market share through low margins and high turnover. Very different than what a lot of people might be saying. For example, a Chinese pen might be only worth 10 cents and you get 1 cent profit, and then you can sell that to anybody because they think buying a pen for 10 cents is great. Versus the Western concept is 1 pen might be worth $1,000. A Mont Blanc pen, for example. And the markup is maybe $500. You might not be able to sell very much, and you only get $500, but that's one sale. However, in China, you sell 1 billion pens, that's a heck of a lot more money. And that's the Chinese strategy that they're usually using. High market share because it's low margin or low profit for many, many people. That point right there is huge. One of the next things we're talking about is test review. Right now it's not on the tests, but I would think that's important to look at. Good at managing money, good at deal making, good at negotiating. Despite what you may see in the news, despite what you may see in a lot of English literature, Chinese and Japanese are incredibly talented at negotiating. So talented, a huge part of this class is going to focus on that. The idea of getting drunk is despised in some countries. However, some people in East Asia have made it an art because that's one way to get to the truth. And it's one way to develop pure, strong relationships with somebody else. The idea of silence. Japanese people are famous for not talking, which means Western people might mistakenly think they're not good at negotiating because they don't say anything. However, if I want to sell you one product, and I'll say, okay, I'll sell this to you for 50 cents, and you don't say anything, the concept of patience in Japan is so culturally different than the concept of patience or the New York minute or time is money in the Western world. The Western negotiators will be there, make the offer for $5, whatever it is, hear nothing, think, uh-oh, there's silence. Silence means there's a problem, means you're not happy. So I'm going to say, okay, not $5, I'll give you a discount, $2. And the Japanese were just being polite and giving them consideration first. So while they're just being polite and waiting, this strange Western person is dropping the price, which encourages the Japanese to continue to be silent. Understand those points are very, very important. Some people say the Chinese state enterprises in mainland China have some failures, but there's failures everywhere. Make sure you're aware of it. Also, compare that with the fact that the biggest organizations in the world now are a lot of the Chinese state-owned enterprises. Yes, they may have powerful bureaucracies. However, the stability and the security is very important to consider. Government support may turn into monopolies. Yes. However, most of the big companies in the biggest countries in the world are following the same thing. Conclusion. We have discussed most of Chinese management. We've talked a lot about how before 1978, Chinese business was completely different. They are evolving. They're changing enormously. They're growing incredibly fast. They are acquiring the latest and greatest technologies and the most professional managers. They're acquiring SAP. They're acquiring Oracle management information systems. You can't usually do better. Even the small firms are adopting these technologies. They're reverse engineering and growing as fast as possible. Modernization of all Chinese state-owned enterprises and Chinese family businesses is a huge part. Make sure you're aware of that, that trend. Most successful Chinese companies in the future will be having a mixed form of traditional Chinese management with Confucianism thrown in there with the Western management style. So, I don't know if I'm sad or not to talk about, we're almost finished talking about Chinese management. We'll be talking about other things later on. We may come back to it a lot. There's a few other small things we'll talk about, but now we're almost ready for the review. One of the students brought this to our attention. It's interesting. It's basically just reminding you that the growth rate and profitability of the listed Chinese family companies is greater than or higher than the state-owned enterprises. Some people might think, well, okay, wow, that's really, really interesting. Some people might think that that's shocking, that the family businesses are Confucian. They might not be as modern as the democratic styles, especially if they have a lot of the family systems where they're preferring family relatives to work rather than just the straight best person. They might not believe it. But this is in some ways misleading. You're comparing 8 people operating, moving faster than a giant tsunami, right? A huge elephant or a state-owned enterprise, it's so big, it's so structured, there's so much bureaucracy, yeah, it's going to be going slow compared to a group of 8 people. So state-owned enterprises grow slow. But don't forget what I started last week with. I showed you some of the world's top companies, and many of the world's top companies are these Chinese state-owned enterprises, and you should recall that the average growth of those big companies is like 17% profit. Then when you turn around and take a look at the North American companies, the profit margin's much smaller. So they're smaller or they're lower growth than the family businesses, but they're still growing incredibly fast. There's a lot more further information that you can get online, and with SSCI journals, of course, are highly recommended. Questions for discussion. What are the similarities and differences of CFBs and CSEs, or SOEs? In order to keep pace with modernization, what can be the best thing for CFBs and CSEs to do now? There's a lot of things you can suggest, but one of the things is definitely to use the technologies that are out there available. The data management systems, the data analytics, the big data, the social media. There's a bunch of references here. The next thing I would like to do is show you this stuff. Before we start talking about this, any questions for Chinese management? You're aware of the percentages of Chinese, overseas Chinese, the percent of populations, and the percentages of wealth that they've controlled. That Bloomberg report is incredibly valuable and interesting. That would be an interesting thing to recall for a long time. You're aware of the size of the family business is usually considered very small. You're aware of the fact that the government has a huge impact on corporations in China. But you should also be aware that the government gets a lot of the consulting from the world's best sources and disseminates that information to those companies. So it might not all be bad to have to follow through with the government work. Yes?
Well, I have a question about the Chinese government and the Chinese state-owned enterprises that you talked about. Well, you said that the Chinese state-owned enterprises are one of the top companies that in the world, but this is because, I think, in my personal opinion, because they are dealing with that 1 billion population.
Great.
And how
Yes.
do you measure their competitiveness?
So just a second to repeat your question to make sure I understand. You're still going to say more, right? But you're started to say Chinese state enterprises are being argued because they might be too big. And you're saying, however, they're huge because they're in a market that has 1 billion people that are supporting them and growing them. Okay, that's an important thing to note. Yes?
So how can you measure the competitiveness of the company with the Western corporations who are relatively very smaller population? Because definitely the state-owned enterprises are supported or protected by their government. And they're not actual perfect market economy.
Okay. So how can we compare a Chinese big company to a North American company? China has more than 1 billion people, almost 1 billion people more than North America combined. Yeah, that's like all of Canada, United States combined. But North America, I guess you're saying, shouldn't do that. They don't have the government protection. A lot of people might think that. But then if you look at the textbooks, you might think North America has the democracy. North America has the different style of management. But don't forget there's a difference between what is often said in gossip and the reality. What happened in 2008? The whole world basically collapsed. There's like $5 trillion in support went to how many different companies? Where were those companies based? The American government basically took billions or trillions of dollars and gave them to American companies. Isn't that the same as what's happening with the Chinese state-owned enterprises? Goldman Sachs is the name of a corporation. Some people say it's also the name of the government in the United States. Most of the people working for a lot of the government is connected with these large investment banking companies. So they're saying it's the exact same thing that's going on in China. So there is a lot of comparisons you can still make. Does that answer your question? Okay. There's still 1 billion people over there. They should eventually have more support in China. But as of now, most of these 1 billion people don't have that many assets. They don't have that much valuables compared to North America. That's why, and one of the only reasons why, the United States is still at the top of the world. Because they have fewer people, but people like Bill Gates that has so many assets, they're still just richer than China. That's changing very quickly. Any other questions? Related to what we were just talking about, remember we said last week, of the 2013 list of Fortune Global 500 companies, almost 20%, 90 of them are Chinese companies. 73 from last year, 61 2 years ago, 34 2008. So just in 2008, there's only 30 companies from China within the world's top 500, and now there's almost 100. It's growing incredibly fast. And those companies that are there are huge. As we see here, Sinopec has over 1 million employees. And their revenues of $500 billion. The stockholder equity and the assets, the profits are still also huge. And you see here, they're growing very, very fast. Here's a better example with China National Petroleum. Their revenue growth was 16% overall. Their profit growth is 11.5% growth. Here, revenue of the state grid, recall again, we're talking in some ways to the Three Gorges Dam, that hydroelectric project. There's 15% revenue growth overall, 117% profit growth. So these state-owned enterprises are definitely interesting to note. And again, there's 850,000 employees. Yes, these are huge. They're interesting to note. Any questions about this before we get into the review? Are there any students that would like to discuss any of your findings within a few seconds? Briefly discuss any of your findings for your projects. What have you found about Chinese management? What have you found is the Chinese social media information?
Can we talk about social media? Okay.
Sure, very, very briefly. Yes?
Well, China is more familiar with the indirect information rather than the direct information in social media, like SNS, like Instagram or Facebook. Compared to the Western nations, America, they are more familiar with the direct information of the product. However, China is more light and tended to resort to campaign or some tips of their, let's assume that they are selling eyewears, then Chinese more familiar with the tips of the how you maintain the health of the eyes or something like that. And then not their direct information of the product.
So you have found some stories that say Chinese businesses might rely more on Guanxi and people telling them things, contact information, rather than the true factual truth. Is that what you're saying? That would be interesting to take a look at. It would be interesting to take a look at who wrote it. Is it a Chinese person that's basing it on fact, or is it based on somebody that's in a Western country that perhaps they're jealous of their power being lost to some newcomer?
Based on the advertisements on Rural and the Facebook. In Rural there is much more, there was many advertisements that deal with indirect information compared to the Western nations.
Okay, that's interesting. That almost everybody here might want to know some of that. We know that Facebook is popular in the United States. We know that Facebook is popular in a lot of the Western world. However, it's not popular in China. In China, you were saying the name of it? Okay, Renren, QQ, Weibo, those are the popular sources there. They are completely different than one another. That's interesting to note. Some of you, to summarize, in case you haven't seen it, almost everybody has seen here Google, what Google looks like. In general, a Google page looks like this. You have the pictures of Google, and then one word, no other information. The opposite of that is a page where you have all this information, this information, this information. Maybe there's a picture here, a video here, lots of information here, stocks here, these details, all of this information. This is the alternative. This is Google. This is generally the Yahoo style. This is also the individualistic style. This is the group-oriented style. This is also popular in the United States. This is also why Google only has less than 4% of the market in Korea. What has the biggest search engine market in Korea? Naver. So this is exactly what Naver looks like too. It's the group orientation that provides you with all information, not just the facts. It's great that you identified that, but the translation might be misleading. To say that this gives you just facts, and so the Western world only gives you facts, and this one gives you, over here, this is gossip. That might be misleading. True, that might be gossip. Those might be the most popular stories on the internet in Kakao or in SciWorld. However, there's also facts and stock details. There's almost everything from the TV show information to the K-pop information to the company details. A lot of the social media in Korea and in China usually follow this. If you have an article that says it's misleading, it might be a great idea for you to be able to research that. Maybe you can write a whole new article just about that. And how it reflects the culture. How is it important? Because it talks about management theories, it talks about this, it talks about art of war, it talks about connecting many different people, and it talks about the management style. How does it talk about the Guanxi? Because this business, who's promoting it? The people that are on the blogs the most. Surprise, surprise, that's this guy, this guy, this guy. The most popular bloggers are promoting this, and everybody's copying them. Doesn't this sound like a very smart thing? This might be faster, but it provides a lot less information. And it's not the relationship-oriented that we talked about here. Remember the whole idea when you're in North America, you see that picture of the, I don't know, this is a great picture, mind you, right? Of an elephant. In North America, you see just this. But in a lot of the East Asian countries, you see the whole safari. So people want to see that whole safari. There's no way to say one is good, one is bad. It's just different. Being able to identify how it's different is important. Great. Anything else that you found? Before we move on, what was your name again? Your TA is Yura? Make sure you've got some good points for that. Anybody else? Everybody's so excited to get to the test questions, right? Here we go. So, we've already talked about this, right? Management theories. Who are some of the management leaders? What are some of the theories that are important? Of course, Maslow, Herzberg, McGregor, XY. Hofstede is not necessarily a management theory expert. He's talking about the cultural dimensions expert. Guys, don't forget, in there, we also talked about Hofstede the most, but we shouldn't be biased for just one person. We should understand, at the end of week 2, I showed you there was several different studies that were all different cultural dimension theories, or studies, or experts. Hofstede is just one that gets a lot of talk. I talk a lot in East Asia, in Korea you don't. Who is most famous for that? High context, low context. The answer is right outside there. Hall. Hall did his studies about high context and low context. Yes, and there's also the Champagnard that was doing a lot of the studies talking about the power distance and the hierarchy. The CEO in some of these East Asian companies are expected, for example in Japan, a Japanese CEO is expected to have answers to any possible question you could have. Does that make sense? Does that sound like it's crazy? Maybe if you're in an equal society where anybody can talk to anybody. But if you are in a big hierarchical society, those people at the bottom only ask the people around them or maybe their manager. And their manager will ask the question to people around them and translate it into more appropriate questioning words for their management. And they will translate it into more appropriate words for their management. And each way along the line, they will answer the question. So you don't need to go up to all the way to the top. Eventually, the people that are surrounding the CEO that ask him this question, they know what he's aware of, they know what he can ask, they ask something that's tailored for that person. So yes, they are expected to have at hand all questions. That's important. Next. Motivational theories. What are the motivational theories? Yes, same thing that we were talking about above. Maslow, Herzberg. What's that theory that's talking about the lights being turned on and off? Make sure that you're aware of that. The Herzberg, the Hawthorne studies, the McGregor's theory X, theory Y, and the Japanese theory, theory Z. Equity theory, the easiest way to study this stuff is in that small box. I've summarized almost all of these. I also discussed in class many times when I was showing you in the very first week what is an example of a perfect paper. I showed you Hofstede's Asian Management in the 21st Century. In there is one table which was showing you that USA was managed this way, India, China was managed this way, I don't know, Denmark was managed this way, and they value this, they value this. These guys don't value this, don't really value this, and what these guys value the most is basically the least valued over here. That whole concept is, I think, incredibly enlightening, so it might be important to know. Theory X, Theory Y, Theory Z, comparative management styles. You guys know there's the economic style, there's an environmental comparative management theory, there's the open system style. You must know, I might forget that last question about the open systems or the comparative management, but I will not forget that picture of culture. If I was to tell you to draw that picture of culture, where culture comes from, and draw that cultural circle, what do you draw? Culture comes from the values, the attitudes, the behaviors, back to the culture. This whole concept, again, values are a main component of this. I hope you guys are aware of those. If I was to ask you, the intro of this book that I talked about said that of 11,000 management articles on international management, what percent involve people from more than one country? What is the percentage? So you guys are all supposed to be studying international management. And so we go to North America and we test what are the world's best international management journals. And we found 11,000 of them. They're talking about international management, but 98% are only talking about companies in the United States by American workers working in it. That generally has nothing to do with international management. So please make sure you're aware that's one of the problems. So when you're doing your research paper, don't forget that. You might be reading something about international management, but it could be biased. That could be a good idea for you guys to research and help companies with. The way of dealing with individuals is different between Protestant and Confucian ethics. Yes? Who talked about this? Who's the guy that first started talking about Protestant work ethics and Confucian work ethics change economic behavior? Max, old man. Yes, make sure you're aware of Weber. Max Weber. What's the difference between the adversary system, fiduciary community? Who knows about that? This, communitary, individual, and this all seem to be related. I will definitely think this is important to know. What are the 4 questions? You have a question?
Can we get the file from our view? It's possible questions, not here.
The questions from last year, this is based on questions from last year. This is in Facebook, yes. What else? The dimensions of face, we talked quite a bit about Guanxi. You have to know what Guanxi is. You also definitely need to know these 2 components. They're big components. What's the average size of the Chinese family business? Right. Yes, good. If we talk about characteristics of the Chinese family business, which one would you say?
5.
What is not? It is Chinese family business is generally small size, 8, 9 people, yes. It's generally informal. It's evaluating performance in a large part based on loyalty. It many times is authoritarian, and it might, there's 2 things that might be different: the complicated structure and longevity. Those, I'll leave it up to you to research, but those are the 2 that are most debatable. It can't be that complicated because it's usually run by one father. Longevity, some people say that the Chinese family businesses only last for 1 generation. Maybe the kids get rich and spoiled and just spend all the money. They don't manage it very, very well. But the 2nd generation, there's a lot of studies talking about that, so we can argue those. Art of War. How many chapters are there in Art of War? 13. What's the difference between business and military? How does it apply to the art of war? Yes, one is constructive and one is destructive. Right. List some of the important features of the art of war. One of the important features is, of course, you should win the battle without entering the battle. Win without fighting. Using the Guanxi. Using your those details. More things, Guanxi, Mian, Mians, Renqing, these are basically the same things we talked about earlier. 4 characteristics of Chinese overseas. That's a lot more open. It might be harder to ask, but it's something to think of. I think it's still very, very interesting. Maybe it can be argued, but the whole idea of that chart that talks about the percent of Thailand people, the percent of Indonesian people, the percent of Philippine people that are Chinese, and the percent of the wealth that they control, I think that's really shocking. I think that should change a lot of your views of just thinking a Chinese person is sweeping up the back of the classroom to now you think, yeah, he might be sweeping up the back of the classroom, but you might want to think of him differently. You guys know that I've owned several different companies, and one of the companies that I've had was a restaurant in downtown Seoul. It was interesting. I rented part of a building for the restaurant, and every morning when we'd go in, there was a little old man in a ripped t-shirt sweeping the outside sidewalk and watering down the dust off of the wall. That little old man, he looked like a Chinese guy, but not only did he own the whole building, he owned about 98% of all blocks in Xinjiang. And he's the guy in the ripped t-shirt sweeping the sidewalks and stuff. You might want to remember that, similar to the Chinese management style. So there's quite a bit of information. Any questions? This file is based on the tests that have been available in Facebook for several years. Yes? I'm not saying this exact same wording is there. I promise you I will not give you the exact same wording for the exam, but these are good things to study. Can I upload it? How about I just say the same questions are already there in the old questions? Any other questions? Come on, guys. Yeah, it's all here. some people here are being very, very, they're managing themselves very, very well. They're using their cell phone and they're taking pictures of this. I might not give it to you, but you already see it here. So related to the test, yes, these management theories. You know of the open system, you know of the economic system, you know of the environmental management, comparative management theories. More important than those theories are the theories related to Maslow, Herzberg, McGregor, equity. So know those, the basics of them. One thing that we didn't talk about here, but in here, this whole book is proving that all of those theories, what's the top one? What's this? Whose theory is this? Maslow, right. What are one of the comments you should say? Should you be following this? Why should you know this? What does he say? More importantly, where is he from? He's a Western person. He wrote it for Western people, saying mistakenly that all human beings follow what the Western people think is good. What is that called? Yes, where is it here? Here we go here. Yes, that's exactly what this is called. And so you should understand things like Japanese might think that the security is most important more than the self-actualization. I might ask you one or two questions from those main videos that I assigned. 2 million minutes. How many minutes are here from this country? What's the average number of minutes for this other country? Something like that. I might show you a picture of a balloon beside a picnic table or a park bench and ask you, what is that representing? I might show you a picture of two different files. This guy going like this guy going like this. What's this talking about? Those concepts. Make sure you're aware of those basic details. Another article that I showed you was talking about if you want to manage yourself for growth, if you want to be successful, what do you need? Will luck help? Will education help? Will effort help? All of these things. What is the most important thing in general that you must have to succeed? Yes. Guanxi. That was talking about social capital. I think we've talked about almost everything. That's it.